Okay, so you've all read the title. And I'm sure you're all wondering, what does this random guy know about perfections? Well, let me present my case. 1, my writing doesn't even make sense half the time, no matter how much I want it to be flawless. 2, I quit piano lessons in 5th grade because it was too hard. And 3, I have never placed above top 50 in a cross-country race. Most of all, I am so far from perfection. But that's what gives me all the reason to talk about it. Okay, but what does perfection really mean? Well, for the purpose of this talk, perfection isn't just about putting your all into your work, but it's about putting so much weight on just one test, one race, one game, or one project, where you haven't even had the time to think about what would happen if you didn't succeed. And when you sometimes don't, because no one is truly perfect, your biggest fear isn't failure itself, but the self-imposed critique that you haven't tried hard enough, that you haven't done your best. Harvard ALM graduate Jessica Kent defines this as self-oriented perfectionism, where you, quote, hold yourselves to unrealistic expectations and are hard on yourselves when you don't meet those expectations. This is what causes us to go for that 100, for that perfect essay, for the perfect game, and probably fall flat on our face trying to get it. Okay, but who here has tried to reach perfection? Because I know I have, and I know you have, and I know that every single person in this entire school, right here, right now, has at least once had. A 2016 study led by PhD author Jordan L. Flett reveals that 25 to 30% of adolescents within the country are affected by perfectionism. Look at the people around you. This marks perfectionism as the most common and the most prevalent adolescent mental struggle. Yet no one is doing anything to deal with it. This just shows that perfection is universal. Perfection, regardless of the metric, means the same to everyone. It means to do something so well where you feel like you couldn't have done it any other way. But I'll tell you the secret right now. There's always another way. Something you missed, something you forgot. Perfection isn't something that's tangible. It isn't some trophy that you can throw on your shelf or a medal that you can wear around your neck. Perfection and the idea of being flawless is itself flawed. Well, in my own life, perfection has always been something that drove me to put the wrong amount of effort into the wrong types of things. I was a kid in middle school pulling late nights studying for the open note math pre-assessment. Yeah. And the one literally crying when I looked down at my paper and saw a glaring 95. To be painfully honest, my parents couldn't care less if I felt short of an A. I'm so glad to have both their support and acceptance. But it was my own stubbornness and my own unwillingness to change that wouldn't let me accept anything less than that. I used to think that my ability and value as a person were a product of my perfectionism. Meaning if I put X amount of hours into something, then I'd have to get Y amount of success out of it. More time equals more quality, right? No. But that was my logic. That was how I thought. Through this, my perfectionism became almost as a means to validate myself. Because if I could convince myself that I put the maximum amount of effort into something, then I wouldn't have to blame myself for my failures. Still, I did begin to realize that something had to change. I mean, it was a bit weird that my friends weren't skipping Halloween night to study for their math quiz. And I knew something was up when I started checking Aries more often than I checked my messages. But I kept searching for this big breakthrough, where everything would just suddenly make sense and all my burdens would just fly away. Instead, my escape came in the form of this back and forth battle between myself and my expectations, where every chance for failure and every chance of a mistake, I'd manage to sneak away just one more imperfection. Something I knew I couldn't accept, but ended up accepting anyways. Through this, I found this certain freedom and being able to stop myself and realize that I already done enough, even when I knew that it wasn't and would never be, quote unquote, perfect. But pause. Take a moment to look at these big words I'm using. Breakthrough, escape, freedom. I'm playing perfectionism up to some kind of monster that you have to run away from. But it often feels like the world doesn't see it that way. Let me just give you an example. Let's say that this is Steve. Now, Steve started his own company. It's really successful, and he's making a ton of money. But Steve isn't just some ordinary guy, no. Because when Steve goes to his favorite restaurant, he sends the food back once or twice or even 3 times to make sure he got the right order. And when Steve arrives at his hotel for a one-night trip, he calls the manager to rearrange the couch so he thinks it's facing the right direction. Steve isn't entitled, no. Steve is a perfectionist. One time, his company spent years making a marvelous, never-before-seen, amazing product. Something so new and so exciting, it would have made anyone else shocked. But Steve just told them to make it smaller. Make it fit in the palm of my hand, he said. That's crazy. I don't know anyone who would do that. But the thing is, I do. We all do. We all know Steve. Only, we know him better as Steve Jobs. I mean, his first house was a 10-minute walk from this building, literally 2 blocks down that way. But I bet most of you didn't realize how much of a perfectionist he really was. He was so much of one that, in hospital for his potentially life-saving operations, he initially refused to wear a face mask and oxygen monitor because they were, quote, too ugly and complex. Yet, at the same time, the phones many of you are holding right now, the Pixar movies you might have seen in the theater, and the very basis of our life in Silicon Valley are his quote-unquote perfect legacy. This is a version of Steve that people like to see, the one that they worship and praise while turning a blind eye to his flaws. It's almost like perfectionism is idolized. People love to see perfection, and to an extent, it's a form of self-idolization, a worshipping of a version of yourself that you can never attain. Similarly, I often hear stories of parents, of teachers, of most importantly students, actually preaching perfection. By telling themselves to adore perfect work, they essentially dumb down success, which is derived from failure, into the black and white term of perfection. This then casts this ideal mold that students are expected to fill every single time with absolutely zero room for error. And it sets in stone the question, what are you if you're not perfect? But this version of perfection can't be farther from the truth. Because as author Elizabeth Gilbert writes in her book, Big Magic, perfectionism is just fear and fancy shoes and a mink coat. Pretending to be elegant when actually it's just saying, I am not good enough and I will never be good enough. This is because, just as perfection is a self-idolization for what you might be, it's also a self-hatred for what you aren't. Not only that, perfectionism is dangerous, both in the figurative sense and in the most tragic cases, the literal. Research led by Hannah Suh from the Counseling and Psychological Center in South Korea finds that self-critical perfectionism directly increases depression rates, actively causing more deaths due to suicide and invoking an unwillingness or inability to seek help stemming from a fear of admitting failure. Still, some tend to argue that perfectionism can still drive success, which is true to a very limited extent. While it can motivate you to put everything you have into your work, it also locks you in this purely rigid mentality where you're scared to branch out, scared to take risks when the fear of failure is always looming over your shoulder. In the words of author Paul Arden, perfectionists spend too much time trying to perfect something before they actually end up doing it. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't strive to be your best, because contrary to what many might say, dedication and perfection cannot be equated. Dedication is how you bounce back from failure, while perfection is a fear of it. From personal experience, I want you all to keep chasing your goals, your dreams, but also know when to stop, when to draw the line between hard work and obsession. Now, I haven't completely crossed the bridge yet, nor can I speak retrospectively. Sure, I can say I'm maybe less than half the perfectionist that I once was, but if I get a 99 on my math midterm for not putting units, then you know I'm fighting for that 1 point. That's because none of us can really get rid of perfectionism, only suppress it. It's in our nature to like shiny and flawless things, just as it's part of our virtue to ignore them. For me, even in the writing of this talk, I had this picture-perfect image of how I'd say every word, make every gesture, and take every step. And I knew this image would never truly come to be. And that's okay. Why? Because I recognize that running from mistakes is itself a mistake, and that perfection isn't some end-all be-all to achievement. So the next time you don't do great on a test, or you have a bad game, or whatever else that might mean for you, be happy with that. And please remember that success and perfection are not the same. Thank you.